everyone. I'm Sarah Christensen with One Sage's View Astrology, and we are continuing our dive into the promo tour for season 3 co-leads Nicola Coughlan and Luke Newton. And we're going to be looking at their charts and focusing in on the Rio de Janeiro, and they're going to that funk party event. I think that was on May 19th, 2024, and look at the astrology for the transits of that moment. I think it's also important to point out that each person, they're individual, so they're going to have an individual experience, and then they're going to have an experience as how they relate to each other in the moment, right? So there's kind of almost 3 different perspectives, one for Luke, one for Nicola, and then also one from their interaction with each other that others may look at as well. So they're kind of also, so maybe even 4. So because other people looking in, what are they observing? But also Luke for his own journey and Nicola for her own journey. And then also what that interplay is as they relate to each other in the given moment. So this is going to be fun. We're diving into the astrology, and everybody voted for having Rio first. Brazil. Let's go, Brazil. And find out what went down in Brazil. I'm curious myself because, the videos from Brazil were definitely a little bit more spicy and a little bit more unhinged, and it just looked like there was a lot going on underneath it all, and that was also slipping out and kind of what we were picking up on, right? So absolutely, the astrology is going to show some truth to that, and how then you can almost look at how even behind the scenes what could transpire with a combination of those energies. So that is what we're going to get into. And if you're interested in your own astrology, you can reach out to me online at my website at One Sage's View Astrology, onesagesview.com, and you can book a reading with me if you want to look at your own astrology at this time. Maybe you have something very challenging going on. Maybe you're curious about career or home, family, your own friends, your own self, and maybe significant partner. Astrology can get into all of that and look at possibilities and potentials and what might be opening for you in the coming, weeks, months, years, and give you some insight. We all have to make choices and decisions. We also have karmic things that we have to step through for our own evolutionary intention for our soul. So that is what astrology can give us. But also, some people, you get into your beliefs. It does tap into that as well, because astrology is happening even when people aren't looking at it, right? And until they look at it and kind of like what is emerging, what is happening, there are still ways that things can manifest, that there's multiple layers to something, right? So perception is important, but it's actually what actually does happen. So to me, astrology, we can kind of pinpoint, yes, these are the potentials that are sitting in that moment, but unless the person tips over and takes action or receives something from somebody else taking an action, that is personal choice, that everything is ripe for that moment. But unless they make the choice, whether they're making it with a fully clear mind, or maybe they have numbed a little bit with some substance. So alcohol and any kind of substance can make what you might otherwise not do when you're sober, you may do when those influences are on board and affecting your choices. So I want to point that out because, not everybody, but a lot of people do have things like in terms of when their guard is up, when they have clarity and, their cognitive ability is sharp. But if you add a few drinks, what happens, right? So we're going to get into that and see what is the potentials and more likely or probabilities based on the astrology of the moment when Nicola Coughlan and Luke Newton were in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Let's go. All right. We are going to get into the charts for Brazil. And in a future video or a few videos, I'll be covering Italy and Australia. But today, since everybody voted not everybody, but a lot of people voted for the Brazil to be covered next, I'm recording that first. But I know that from the transits that were happening when they were in Australia and in Italy, build upon the story for Brazil. So keep that in mind. All right. So there's Australia, Milan, Verona, Rio de Janeiro, and this is just Rio de Janeiro at 10:30 a.m. in May 19th. What I want to kind of show here is that at that moment, the moon is conjunct with the south node. And I think it's really important to point out how precise this moment is in terms of connecting for the south node for Nicola in Libra. And it's also the moon is kind of reminding me that there's something coming from the past to be opened up. And this is the moment, okay? And it'll be behind the scenes, but still have some visibility to it because we have astrology, right? And then the Mars is instinct, and the North Node that's like the soul, that's marking a moment that this is where the soul leans into, as it has an opportunity to lean into the instinctual nature, which is a part of Nicola's natal chart around communication, perception, and these kinds of things, and leaning into instincts, leaning into, saying something more direct and understanding herself from within that context of what's going on. So I think that's important. We also have Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, the vertex in Pisces, amplifying kind of the illusion and the having drinks or, any kind of thing that will make your clarity less sharp. That's definitely a part of the mix as well. And very sensual moment with all of the Taurus happening with Uranus with Venus conjunct. Venus is the planet of attraction and what we're attracted to and how we feel about that attraction and what's kind of coming out in our attraction. Mars is how we act upon the passion. Venus is the attractor beam and what we allow into that, space. But it's kind of has the hard eyes. That's a Venus with hard eyes, and it's being amplified, made bigger, like 100 times, amplified 1,000 times more than it would normally otherwise be, because you have the sun at the critical degree of 29 degrees of Taurus. You have Jupiter at 28 degrees of Taurus, but the Uranus with the Venus, and the Venus has recently moved over that point of the Uranus in transits, meaning it was activated in a big way, even the day before, 2 days before. So they were in New York first, flying down. Did they fly down together? I don't recall if that's the case or not, but I think it's important to point out that there is something getting stimulated right out of the gate as they're heading towards Rio, okay? In terms of the attractor beam. The sensual attractor beam, so important right here. What else for Rio? Just first glance. And this is, of course, 10:30 in the morning. I think 10:30 in the morning, they may have been taking those photos in Rio that were on the boardwalk and walking around, but that could have been like the next day or something. But this is kind of the day before the party happening at the funk party. So I just want to point those out right away and then jump into their side-by-side charts, kind of taking a glance. I actually want to go into personal view first. This is at 10 p.m. I have them on side-by-side, so I guess I'll go to the side-by-side chart. So 6 p.m. is the moment of the party starting and them, kind of being in the public eye and doing all the things for the Netflix event to kick off Bridgerton season 3, and how they were celebrating kind of at this point, the part 1 had been released. So the carriage scene was really huge in the conscious of all the fans, and just I think there was even a carriage as a part of the display of promotional as a part of that party. And so that's it's amplifying that energy that was kind of the carriage scene. Okay, so multiple things like really amping up the energy. So for each person it's going to be slightly different, but let's start with Luke. Okay, Luke Newton's big kind of thing I see in his chart is I've covered how important this square is between his Saturn. It's kind of Sun, Saturn, Mercury, but it's really highlighting that combination square, the Pluto in Scorpio, the Psyche in Scorpio in his chart at the bottom of his chart. And so this is kind of deep, very personal experience and his feeling around it. And it's kind of a little bit of a nightmare from inside the consciousness, but it has to be transformed. So there'll be things that get recreated as for the soul so they can have a breakthrough around that. We definitely know that from my doing Luke's evolutionary details in his own chart and progressions before. Okay. But in this moment of what's going to happen in Rio de Janeiro, they've already kind of come through the New York premiere. The New York premiere has happened. The part 1 has happened. The part 1 release has happened. People have been watching it, and it continues to stack up the ratings. It's been a couple of days, right? It was released on May 16th. So we're 3 days out from that event. So it's just amplified energy. The amplification of Taurus energy is very sensual, high sensual, just it's magnified just 1,000 times from an otherwise normal day, right? But this is not a normal day. And they're going to a very sensual location, which is Rio de Janeiro. So this is amplified in his consciousness, and it's kind of bringing it out, how he'll be in the public eye. His own response and how he is being picked up by others will be highly sexualized, if not, the sensual nature of Luke Newton will be amplified. Let's put it that way. Sexualized might be a different, but maybe so. I mean, he was fully dressed, right? So it's more that it's like what's on his face, what is the innuendo that's going down, what is being said and what is not being said, but body language, all that sensual that's just oozing out of his energy field and directed at who other than his co-lead, Nicola. Okay. And they're having a good time. So the energy is good in terms of them feeling so comfortable about how they were answering certain questions and how some people call it was so unhinged in Brazil. But it's the openness that is like excitement. Now that they've got part 1 is released, there's a fantastic response. And the carriage scene is just a really big one for people. There's so many TikToks and Instagram reel whatevers of people reacting to that, starting to hit on social media. So it's starting to continue the amplification of that Taurus energy, right? Well, for Luke, it is putting his career in the spotlight, his I think it's in Brazil that it is revealed. I think in one of the interviews in Brazil, because I think he's when he's wearing the green sweater, the dark green sweater, that he even talks about the 2-finger deal, acting thing that he did in the carriage scene, that it was all up here, in his consciousness of how he was taking care of the other person in the scene, which is Penelope, but Nicola's character. So this is all in the consciousness very forward, right? So we have to kind of go back into that place and space of how amplified that moment was. And last night, to get ready for doing this video, I was rewatching some that I had watched before, but even came across some new ones of the reaction videos of people, especially the husbands or the boyfriends of people watching the show, and especially the carriage scene. So many people recorded the reaction to the carriage scene. And I was laughing out loud again, and in the joyful release that comes from that, just watching people get joyful over that little bit naughty, story, part of the storyline. But it was so romantic, and then it was really spicy, and then it was just real in terms of two people coming together, how they laughed in that scene. But this is all forward. And for Luke Newton, we're seeing he's going to have that up front of his mind, right? And how he feels about Nicola that's even been buried since then. So if we go back in time, they were filming season 3 in 2022. And so he had a lot going on with him in 2022, but he was with Jade, the last significant girlfriend of note, and I think up until the end of the year, and it was possibly in November, December, probably December, that their relationship was starting to fade out. Okay, I think it was not announced until March maybe, but I think it was definitely fading out before then, and he was having to deal with that as the last scenes were being maybe filmed. Right? So that's transpiring, and he's, have these intimate scenes that he's done with Nicola. If there's true attraction, which I think absolutely is the case based on their charts, based on, the chemistry that they have had and suppressed, and they've even made mention of it. Good friends, they how they mentioned it in interviews. But to me, there's a lot more going on than is what they said in interviews, based on some other information that has since come out. And I think that's part of the rise of energy as they get to Rio, because there are moments in Australia that point out some things. There's some moments in Italy, both in Milan and in Verona, that also point towards what's going on with these two. And by the time they are back in New York, they have their premiere, all that energy, all the things coming forward. And now we are post New York, and that's the first kind of point milestone. They're getting through that, and so much excitement, just the elation of that. I can't even imagine if you had that much going on in this as an actress and an actor, how much they would be feeling with all that. And then it just continues to rise, right? You done the work, but the feeling of what's personal behind it. I mean, you're caught up in a wave of stuff too. So it's like, but there was definitely some serious feelings, I think, going on in 22 that like late 22 into 23, and then as other things emerged, April, May, no, maybe over the summertime, how that may have been paused in some way and kind of pulled back again. And then once they got into the tour, then it got picked up again for their exchange of energy. Because I think when they are together, there is this kind of incredible amount of energy. But what can distract from the energy of their connection can be outside influences that do distract from it. So that could be the projects that Nicola had going on, could be a distraction of how much time you even get to spend with a partner, potential partner, let's put it that way. And then for Luke, it would be he's coming out of a long-term relationship and what he's trying to figure out for himself, but then spending time with friends and then going on vacation, and what goes on with going on vacation with friends and what comes into the mix and the distractions from whatever that is, right? So that's all in here. And yet when they go off on tour together, they have left behind other distractions, right? So now it's face to face. Here we go. And the energy is just like really in focus. El fuego on fire. So passions are going to come forward. Feelings are going to be coming forward. But also with feeling so much energy you have to be careful because you're getting caught up in a moment that is something beyond. So your ego is just going with it. And so much ego getting inflated like that, you can feel like you're high, so high. And you add some alcohol to that feeling, you can feel like you're invincible and all your desire just come forward and you want to act upon it and your ego is inflated. So all of these things hold true for both of them, okay? Ego inflation. Ego inflation can make you feel like you're invincible and that nothing could go wrong, okay? That you're riding the highest wave and you're floating along with it and everything is making you feel good. And then if you add any alcohol, even one drink can make that the barrier that you've put up to keep a certain boundary could drop, okay? So these are very, very important things to keep in mind of the elements of the moment that make something have a potential to happen. Okay, so the boundaries that have been put in place for maybe there's another relationship, kind of, sort of, but never defined. So just having fun, but maybe wants to act on something that's really deeper, maybe that because it's been there longer is emerging, right? So the feelings that Luke has for Nicola, and maybe even that Nicola has for Luke, but never acknowledged that she would act on it beyond he's my friend, but I get to be flirty. Because you know what, when you have someone who's like a best friend and you've never acted on something, it's almost like you can keep the flirtation going because you're not going to cross the boundary because you've already put up a boundary in your mind that, oh, we're just friends so we can flirt like this and it's okay, right? But as soon as there's no distractions, you're away from some work, you have work that's very different, you're in a different land, you're in a foreign country, you're going from place to place, and you have to be, doing the photography, you have to, go for a photo call or whatever they call it, and appear, you have the PR that you have to do. But the feelings and that are there are going to come forward again because you're together, you're doing something together. You don't have scripted things. So this will be important for Luke because not having a script is more dangerous for Luke Newton. When he's with a script and playing a character, he can mold that how he wants. But when it's on the fly, interviews, questions coming at you, and opening all these like thoughts and thinking about something the way you think about it, you could get into, having more of yourself quite visible, right? Like, and even put you in more of a vulnerable spot. So you have all this energy amping up. The Rio de Janeiro funk party happening May 19th. Both of them coming together with outfits that are like extreme for the heat. If you ask me, I'd be like give me some linen, please. Tropical, with being in a tropical like place with all that attire that they had, the costume that she had on, and the coat and jacket that he must have been melting in that. For a man with all that muscle, he would have just been melting, just completely melting. But I'm sure she was too. It's so hot. So that starts all adding to the mix of just like, goodness, the heat. So I think with Luke Newton's chart the way it is, and this square, this fixate. So to me, it's like there's no distraction from others in terms of what he's going to have his hard focus on, his fixated focus. His fixated focus then pulls in, that's pulling in Nicola in his view in a much more dynamic way, but also being spilled out to the world because very visible for his career. All that sensuality is like front and center and very visible. And so the collective that he's experiencing in his career is just highlighting all that sensuality. And so that's kind of what's rising up. And it's opposite very, very sexy, sexy, sexy Scorpio. And Scorpio can be extremely attractive, but it's almost like femme fatale attractive, right? It's really hard to describe that. With Pluto involved, it goes to the deepest core of the psyche. And for Nicola, that's on the top of her chart. And she has the Taurus on the bottom of her chart. Okay. So the Taurus with their respective, like hers is Aquarius rising, he is Leo rising, it's like a switch. You put both of them in Rio and it's almost like the tables got turned, both like in Brazil, but also Australia, because they were below the equator. It gives a flip to the chart a bit, at least from a point of perspective. So the soul can, I think you can read it both ways. But when you do cross the equator, you do have something. If you were born in the northern hemisphere, you have this a little bit flipped perspective that can be picked up in a big way. There's a whole astrology on that, and I can share links to that later in the description below. But if we have that kind of experience, it's amplifying the sensuality. Sensuality is such a key word for Taurus, and the natural goddess beauty, like that we would perceive between them coming together. Now, there is so much attraction to Nicola that is like, I've never seen so much attraction on an actress like that. I mean, the way it's been shared and like, oh, she's a goddess, like she's a siren, she's a goddess, and these kind of descriptions for Nicola coming from fans, right? Like, I don't even know what my sexuality is anymore because of Nicola Coughlan, that kind of thing. That's what's like coming out. Like, so imagine having feelings that maybe if you're Luke Newton and you have feelings for this person and they show up in like costume, lady whistle down, the dangerous side of the parts of that character that she played, and the dangerous part of that personality, like the risk taker, the breaking the rules, these kinds of things of that part that was put in that costume, right? And it's red, so sexy in the red. That is just amplifying it, right? So at the party, dance is happening. Not that I saw much that Luke was dancing, but Nicola was a little bit, yeah. But there was a little interaction at the party that was visible with a fuzzy looking video, I think, where he touched her chin, and there must be talking about something. So it's kind of a like, whoa, that was a little bit of a sensual touch that got seen there. So that to me is like the leak out of information that just gives us a hint. It's like a whiff of, but not only that, you add in the interviews, how he was standing holding her hand in the Brazilian interview, or the pictures first where he's just pulling her so close and her looking up to him. My goodness, she had the biggest heart eyes I've seen on that on her in the promo tour in that particular moment. And then some of the questions that they got and how Luke answered about, if I can kiss my friend, is it okay to kiss my friend, and what he answered. Just, yeah. So they're all like showing that they are wide open, right? Like so wide open. And then as the party progresses into the evening, this is at 6 p.m. in the beginning, and the moon, earlier in the day was at, I look at where's the moon, what's it doing? It's in Libra. It's activating Nicola's South Node, and it's activating his Jupiter about the relationship. They are getting clocked in on their connection. their relationship without others distracting in that particular moment, and completely juiced up in all the ways that you can imagine for sensuality to be spilling over. So you have also, that's in Libra. So in Libra, it can be looking at the response of the other person as a part of that mix, but also that it is amplifying an easy flow to all the air in their chart. So all his Aquarius is trine to that. So that's a trine. That's easy flow. That's easy energy. Very friendly, very attracted to, wide open, no gate. Okay. And then his south node too. So all of that is being activated in that moment, peaking in that moment for something to open up, to have this connection, right? In the cerebral, in the mind, in the connecting. Okay, in what is communicated, in what is in the loop of like you and I, you and me, you and I, whatever, right? So it's kind of like in that perspective, how they feed off each other. It's completely amplified and no gates, no blocks. Okay, the thing that is going to be stirring in both of them though is different. It stirs up Luke's fixated sexual self that's in his psyche. The amount of sexuality in his Pluto really significant, and then how he fixates on something, right? Like, so he has that as a bit of a challenge. But if he plays it right, it becomes something huge in terms of his ability to put it into a character, Colin Bridgerton, and how he plays that character out through certain activities of sensual nature in a carriage or in a room with a mirror, so that's important. Okay. So that's probably how his mind, fixates on something. For Nicola, that air is like amplifying a couple of things. How she might flirt, because it's fifth house of the Venus principle is fifth house. So it's like, but it does activate some of her Chiron, and her Chiron is, what is she thinking, right? So, but she may fault herself for thinking a certain way and try to course correct, but she has the instinctual nature to, and that's why she's so funny, is that she can roll things quickly, but she might, think differently on some things as it pertains to how she relates in relationships, right? And then what kind of mask does she build from that, right? That's the Aquarian energy. The Aquarian energy in her chart is also to a little bit be more liberated, even though it might have old ideas in the unconscious mind that it wants to try to behave around on certain things. But so much of her chart is you're going to have some experiences that, force you to think outside the box and act outside the box. You need that to heal whatever you're healing as it pertains to past relationships. Okay. She has to liberate that part of herself so she can actually experience more of Venus. Yeah. Because the Venus is the thing that she gets hung up on and is trying to turn it a little bit so she actually has a more real experience, an authentic experience. And she could still struggle. Absolutely. She's going to struggle with it at first because that's the thing that was in the past where she got stuck. Right. But she has to be pushed into situations as a soul. And this is one of them where it's like, it's right there, right in front of you. What are you going to do about it? And you may have your perception that you have to be a certain way to protect yourself or to hold your energy in a certain way or whatnot. I know this sounds kind of counterintuitive to a lot of people, but someone who had a past life experience where Venus was punished for being being human and having a relationship and having a sensuality and pleasure and being liberated by their sexuality or in some kind of relationship that liberated them in some way, and then being punished for it, or hurt. Like it could be in her consciousness that I may have tried to have a relationship with a friend before and it went sideways and I never recovered from it. So what does the soul do? It puts the person right back in a similar situation, possibly the same person that it went, and then do they course correct this time? Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense, because that's the thing and power of evolutionary astrology is understanding that you have to kind of step back into the mess to actually unravel the knot that was there and and then reweave it. Reweave the strings in some way that makes sense for you. Now, some relationships from the past do have unfinished business, and they only last a certain amount of time, and they are not to really go beyond that time because maybe one person evolved further than the other in a given moment. Okay, that is so true. But so, for example, some people could have like a relationship that lasts about 4 years or 4 years, like what was the relationship that Luke had with Jade, a legitimate relationship. But in that, they both have something that they hit a wall. What was the wall, right? Like the relationship did not survive the thing. And it could be that she was a part of his Saturn return, and Saturn return does have a karmic twist on it. But you could also say that his connecting with Nicola during that time period is also karmic. The question is this: we often have the repeat to open up the thing to figure in some new medicine, right? Like how we might approach it from a different angle, a different response, and how we deal with it. Theirs is just so explosive because it's on the world stage, and yet it's happening. It's opening up like just a Pandora's box as the Jupiter and the Uranus come together in Taurus. That is just cracking that wide open. And for them to have maybe had come to a certain level of relationship, and I have no idea without, there's really something about validating someone's experience in astrology when you have a reading and a consultation that it's like, okay, this is what the chart is telling me, but is that what you did actually experience and go through? Because there's a subjective, part of the equation there. There's something that we can say, this is a probability. Is that what you experience? There's a confirmation and validation by having a reading, because if you just have a reading and they're just telling you what, this is what the energies are, but without the person actually nodding, yes, oh, that does validate what I did experience. And then you can get at exactly where they are in the evolutionary curve. Okay, that's the whole point of having an engaged back and forth kind of reading. The astrologer can get into the reading and give you some information and start building the framework and saying, I can tell you certain points, but then it's like, where are you now? Where, you've had these experiences. What do you want to experience now? What are you still treading on and or bumping over or tripping over, because you're still healing that thing, right? So that is for everyone, not just these two. So it's for everyone that it's important to understand the value, what's in a moment. And there's a defined, these things come in waves, and I look at Luke Newton, he is building towards a karmic. We already have, the moment of June 12th and, the pap photos, and then what that spilled over for him, and also for Nicola as a participation of that, because they had to have 3 to have the jealousy, to have all the thing and the comparisons and all the things for Luke. Okay, that had to take place. But it's also important for Nicola because it's her friend, as she's described it, or it goes beyond a friend. It goes into the place where she's described as like, I love Luke, and he's, a person that I've done, this unique thing with. No one else in my life would ever understand the thing except for Luke. And they kind of describe it like that. So it goes beyond your typical BFF that we could ever even imagine. I mean, this is something that I think most people can't even imagine how much energy is on it. And then how you still have to live your life and then have a frame for your context of how I'm seen in public. What's my public image? All these things that everyday people who just don't have that kind of media attention on them could probably even fathom. Okay. This is so important because it's part of Rio, in the Rio experience and the frenzy of energy that is in the air from all of the things that were building up to that point and before the fallout. But it was multi-layered in terms of building for something for Luke, building something up for Nicola to experience in June and then throughout the summer, and as they will unravel the knot that came from that. But the Rio was so important for that. It's like the peaking moment, okay? Even to the London premiere when, he's getting the visual of her in that veil and that she looked like a goddess at that event, right? But there was already strained energy approaching that event, okay? Because when they got back home and he's mixing with his friends and Antonia and family and whatnot, I mean, now there's distractions from the two, right? Because when they're just them two, it's a different game. But like there's just, and I think the cast members could see that, because when they're at work in that mode, they would have that kind of, and especially season 3, amount of time that they would be in the trailers together, preparing, dancing, all the things that they did, that was just amplifying that connection, right? And underneath it all, there is still unresolved energy from 22 and 23 that I think they were percolating and getting close to that, which makes everything flow the way it flowed, right? From Australia, Italy, New York, and Brazil, right? So I think I want to point that out, because if I were just, I look at it's like you'd have to be Mother Teresa or something to that, in terms of, I don't even have that in any of my consciousness, to walk into Rio de Janeiro with that amount of Taurus energy, amplifying your psyche that's very highly sexualized in the first place. If you acknowledge that you are, definitely you are, Luke Newton, and you have a fixated nature with the Aquarian partner, and Nicola's in view, and Mars is marching right next to the North Node, transit-wise, recently going over that. To me, there's like the Mars going over the North Node and the Moon going over the South Node is just amplifying the instinctual nature as it pertains to that relationship. What are the instincts that are spilling out of you publicly that everybody can see? And then what do you do when you're away from the crowds, in the hotel, or in the late evening hours, past 10 o'clock at night to however late in the evening you go, under the protectiveness of security guards, very tall security guards apparently in Rio, and having conversations, food, sensual everywhere, sensual in Rio, I'm sure. Goodness, that doesn't spill over in actually doing something with an action, and the action is Mars, and that is a Mars that's going to take the action. Yes, you would have to be a saint not to. I mean, for real. Is Luke Newton a saint? Is Nicola a saint? I don't think so. I think they're two human beings with a lot of energy, ego inflation, possible a little bit of joyful exuberance with a little alcohol added in the nights, especially May 19th. After the party, that's the after party high. Going back, chill. Unless you're completely exhausted from travel, but that's not a lot of jumping time zones from New York to Rio. That's not that huge of a jump, right? I mean, by the time they get to Toronto, I bet you they're probably getting tired. But Rio, bring it on. They were on. Now, what else do I want to share? I think for Nicola's own chart of saying something so direct, very flirty, with a Mars in Aries, it's going to say something. That is just her. And with her Venus in Sagittarius, she's going to be very open about sexuality. Like, even though she may have considered herself cut off, I shouldn't say cut off. That's not that right word. And even though she may have on her internal world put it is, maybe she has some blocks around her own feminine sexuality. I think playing the role of Penelope, and Penelope opening into her sexuality through the, going to work. I know this sounds crazy, but by going to work and having to do that role and step up into that romantic co-lead like that, it actually pushed her boundaries beyond what she would have ever done on her own outside of that role. Because she's more inclined to do more of a comedic role. She is more aligned with doing comedy and very comfortable with the comedy than she would ever have done for a romantic. I mean, Bridgerton has given her such a juicy role to, develop her acting chops for sure. But it pushed her on her own openness to get into her own sexuality, pleasure, the lover, not just partner. That she has to break through on the lover part first, and then commit in once she's broken through on that, because it's one thing to be playful and all that stuff, but then as soon as it gets serious and there's I have real feelings, I want to have you in my life, that's Luke is going to lock in on that. Luke having summer love kind of connections, he needs those experiences as well. I do not judge him. I think that's human nature. It needs to explore what they need to explore. I do not think negatively at that. I mean, I don't care about that at all. Because I remember being in my 20s and I have a Venus in Sag, and I remember having to go through my own kind of sexual openings and things like that. That makes total sense to me. I don't think negatively of it at all. It's what we repress that actually is a bad thing. There are certain rules and things that you have to do as consent, and, do I do with this with some, that's what's maybe more tricky, is that this is somebody you have to work with. What happens if, after work, right? That makes it a little challenging, right? Absolutely. But goodness, how many relationships have started because they work together? Millions of people have connected because they met at work. Very common, right? But it's like, it is a difficult thing if something doesn't work out, though, right? That can get where it's tricky. And I'm sure she's thinking about that. I'm sure they both have been thinking about that. But based on some of the music that I think in 22 or 23, I can't remember what year it was, but Tiff, thank you for your timeline. Loved your live. But I think it's important to kind of look back in their history a little bit. And there was so much more information than I didn't have when I started this thing, that makes a ton of difference about how close they were getting to connecting more seriously. And I think absolutely that was peeking through in the information that we got on the timeline. So if you haven't looked already at Tiff's work, she's on TikTok. She's done so many memes, but it's her lives that have been fantastic. That's been a lot of super fan. Love that. But I think I like it that just kind of validates a little bit more information that the astrology was showing anyway. But I kind of have to step a couple paces back to look at the bigger picture. It's like, oh yeah, this is like a potential, there's a 50-50 chance that they end up together. I will say that still, because the souls have to go through a process to integrate something that they learn when they get to those peak karmic moments that has their relationship under the microscope between the two of them. So to get to that point anyway, they have to have some kind of significant connection that is very much felt in the heart. So the question is, they have to navigate some stuff that's been very noisy, very chaotic on top of it. And then what has transpired, the in-between. And the in-between is one may have said it's not a good time. This is I can't go there or whatever. They could have said that back in 23 or 22, 23 more likely. And then, it just keeps continuing to spill over. But the other person tries to go and have other relationships, sort of, but not really into them totally, at least from an outside point of view. Maybe they are and not claiming it, so just trying to keep private, but it's sure messy, isn't it? But I think that when the souls are trying to go through that experience, it has to set up in a way that makes sense for it to be so deeply felt that it could have the moment that it starts to unravel the places that they've gotten stuck before. So here's the question. I always ask these kind of questions, and I think, okay, well, does the astrology show the potential to get back together? Because it's like they have the moment that kind of spilled up to this certain point, and then it spilled over into some messiness and some chaos. Okay, we're in that right now, yeah? So Luke has to do his own integrating of what am I attracted to, and why am I attracted to it, and what do I want in my life? He's maybe already said what he's attracted to, right? Maybe that was met with resistance because Nicola maybe wasn't ready to have a relationship with somebody so close to work. That could be the case. Or she was too busy at the time. And, there's other things that could be in play there. Maybe she was in another relationship and it wasn't folding over correctly in time. But then when those open up again, does it reconnect? And that is very possible that it does reconnect based on the astrology of the progressed Venus and the experience of the solar eclipse for Luke. He has to go through a process. How long does he take on that process? I give it different points in time that it's going to have this transformational effect that starts showing up in his life. And does that go back and lock in on Nicola? Does he carry that with such a high fixed energy in his chart because of all of this in his chart? All of that Aquarius is so fixed, and all of that is so fixed. Fixed signs, okay? And that was amplified by fixed energy, okay? So to me, it is those feelings do not go away overnight. Take it from somebody who did have a relationship in my 20s, where I dated somebody, met them when I was like 19 or 20, and that carried on through college. But then there was like there was an interruption in that, and then it went back to that. So, but was it end game? No, it wasn't end game, and I'm kind of thankful that it wasn't end game because of other things that played out, right? But that one was an interesting experience to understand so much of myself, but also understanding where they were, right? Like the souls have certain things that they have to work out, and that they by certain choices will focus in on some particular thing. So that is why, free choice, the free will of a soul is so important to kind of like, okay, what are you choosing? But it's also like, what are you choosing now based on everything that you've been through, right? And there are still things that Luke has to acknowledge and deal with from his inner circle of friends. That's coming, right? And that's part of this maybe shift. And maybe that shifts who's the other friend that he's connected to. It is Nicola, right? And she could just be working girl, doing her thing, and still sharing, being friends. That's what happened. You pull back, you still stay friends. It's like, I still love you. You're my friend. How's it going? How you doing? Maybe have a beer, whatever. But I think in terms of like deep diving into feelings, will take some time to reconnect on that based on what happened this summer of 2024. But it just depends, like how the response is, how mature the response is when they are back together. Okay. But Rio was definitely a tipping point in more ways than one. We can just take it from what we see as collectively looking from the outside in, from what is revealed in the interviews, revealed in the images, revealed in the videos. But then the astrology is like, well, yeah, this is the moment that it could tip over, spill over, and connect physically. To what degree? I'm not going to get into what degree, but absolutely everything in these charts are amplifying them connecting physically to amp it up even more. Or that the temptation is so great, right? Or that if you've added alcohol, your clarity of judgment to keep your boundary that you may have had for over a year, it's dropped, right? So I think all of those elements add up to physical connection, absolutely. Snogging in the corner, snogging in the hallway of the hotel, holding hands probably on the beach, maybe snogging on the beach. Who knows? I mean, under the cover of darkness. I mean, how dark it is on. I mean, it's probably pretty dark, but I mean, when you're in a place like Rio, I mean, there's probably so much ambient light coming from the city. It's not like completely black dark, but you can be walking along the beach at night and have people, your security guards close by, but not like, they're not going to say anything. And even like, the highly paid staff at certain hotels are not going to say anything. So you have a kind of a bit of protective cover, a bit, those kinds of things, right? So there is all this opportunity in that moment, in those moments, and especially on the 19th and into the 20th of May. And then it starts spilling over into Scorpio moon. And as soon as that moon goes into Scorpio, the Scorpio moon intensifies the feeling, intensifies the sexual nature, right? There's sensual nature, which to me, sensual nature is, oh my gosh, I'm so attracted to this thing, right? So attractive. The beauty overwhelms me. They're so amazing, just that, and it's the attractor beam. It's like you're being pulled into it in such a way. It's just like, I cannot help but be pulled into the thing. The fragrance on the air, the taste, the food tastes so great. I mean, geez, it's orgasmic, so much. All that Taurus energy acting in opposition to his Scorpio. But as soon as that moon leaves Libra and goes into Scorpio, it kind of goes, God, I have to make it real. I've got to make that mine, and pulls it in more. Right? So that's but a Scorpio moon can get moody too. It can get into an intensification. And when it moves into Scorpio, as that moon is moving here, it is squaring this self and other in a huge way. Not only that, it puts that moon at a trine to this part of his chart, okay? And that's so huge in terms of, Juno, potential wife, trine, Mars. I want to act on this thing sexually, and it's intensified. You nourish me to my core, right? That's there. It's amazing. So you have to be a saint not to like partake. It's just, but maybe we have saints that live among us. Yeah, I think that's pretty stunning what it was in Rio. Rio is off the charts, amplified Taurus energy.